Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller film named Abigail. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a group of people breaking into a wealthy mansion in the dead of night and kidnapping the only daughter of a billionaire. In truth, these kidnappers, despite working seamlessly together, were complete strangers to each other. They didn't even know each other's names. Gathered by greed and bound by profit, they planned to disperse the moment they received their 50 million ransom. Once the deal was done, they would erase this night from their memories. The drop-off point was a secluded villa. The mastermind behind the operation never showed up, only sending a butler to negotiate. The butler stated that the ransom demand would take at least 24 hours to be processed. Until then, they were to guard the girl carefully and not leave the villa, not even for a moment. Additionally, they had to abide by 3 strict rules. They could never reveal their real names, never inquire about the girl's identity, and never be curious about the mastermind's true identity. As long as they followed these 3 rules, they would receive their payment when the time was up. Once the butler left, the woman named Joey entered the bedroom and removed the blindfold from the girl's eyes. The terrified girl, mistaking her for a savior, burst into tears and begged her for protection. Looking at the pitiful little girl, Joey thought of her own son. She held out her pinky and made a promise not to let anyone harm her. A while later, Joey rejoined the group. Meanwhile, the bespectacled man, Frank, consumed by curiosity, sneaked into the bedroom. He was stunned to find the girl's blindfold had already been removed by Joey. The girl had now seen his face clearly. There was only one way to ensure her silence: eliminate her. But just as he was about to act, the girl called herself Abigail and uttered her father's name that made his blood run cold. Frank froze since Abigail's father was no ordinary businessman. He was a notorious mafia kingpin who ruled both the legal and criminal worlds with an iron fist. Now he finally understood why the butler had forbidden them from asking about Abigail's identity. He had already broken the rules, but instead of covering up his mistake, he decided to turn the tables. Feigning disinterest, he prepared to leave the room, but deliberately made a scene, drawing the attention of the others. Then, he revealed Abigail's true identity, dragging everyone into his violation of the rules. If they all broke the rules together, then technically no one had broken them. The countdown had 22 hours left. Anxious and uneasy, the group dispersed. The flat-top man was restless. Unable to sleep, he sneaked into Sammy's room to make hormone advances toward her, only to be beaten black and blue and thrown out. Hormone frustrated and hungry, he wandered into the kitchen for a late-night snack. Suddenly, he heard a creaking sound behind him. The door to the storage room had mysteriously opened. He cautiously stepped forward to investigate but found nothing inside. Just as he was about to turn around, a cold hand clamped around his ankle and yanked him into the darkness. Hearing his muffled cries, Sammy rushed to the kitchen. There, she found the flat-top man sitting eerily still on the floor. She called his name, shook him, but he didn't respond. Annoyed, she smacked him on the shoulder, only for his head to fall clean off into her hands. The group gathered once more, staring in horror at the flat-top man's mutilated corpse. Someone muttered that it looked like the work of a wild animal. But how could a sealed-off villa harbor such creatures? Lambert's face darkened since he had seen such gruesome remains before. Slowly, he recounted a chilling urban legend. Years ago, several criminals were locked inside a hotel room by the police. When the officers returned the next morning, all they found was a bloody mess of flesh and bones. The culprit was never caught, but investigators discovered he had entered through the window. The strange part was that the crime scene was on the 23rd floor. The perpetrator was a notorious serial killer known as the Cannibal Butcher. At that moment, realization dawned on them. The serial killer was here, somewhere inside the villa. Panic set in. Lambert rushed to escape, but as soon as he opened the front door, he froze. A newly installed iron gate blocked the exit. Peter, the group's muscle, charged at it using his bare muscles, ramming his massive frame against the metal. But the moment he made contact, an automatic defense system activated, sealing off all the windows and doors. They were trapped. Joey hurried to check on Abigail. When she returned, her face was pale. With a trembling voice, she announced something that made everyone's blood turn to ice. She was told that Frank was the serial killer. She wasted no time and relayed the information to Lambert. They devised a plan. Lambert would distract the serial killer while she led the others to find an escape route. But as soon as they started moving, Lambert suddenly stopped in his tracks, motionless. Joey turned back, only to see his lifeless body, his throat torn out. Without hesitation, she raised her gun and aimed it straight at Frank, demanding to know why he came to this villa and why he killed Lambert. Frank was dumbfounded. He was just as confused as they were. Then, something dawned on him. Abigail, the same girl who had called out his name, was the only one who had identified him as the serial killer. But how did she know about the serial killer? There was only one explanation. She was working with him. Peter, considering the logic, sided with Frank. They needed to interrogate Abigail, force the truth out of her. But Joey refused. She stood between them, gun raised, unwavering in her belief that Abigail was innocent. The night was far from over. The real nightmare had only just begun. A group of people stood around the bed arguing furiously. One moment, the kidnapped Abigail was crying and trembling, and the next, her face turned eerily dark. Without a word, she unshackled her handcuffs, gracefully posed like a ballerina, and then flashed a sinister grin, revealing a mouthful of sharp fangs. In a split second, she lunged at Peter. Frank fired at her in panic. Bright red brain matter splattered against the wall, but within moments, the bullet wound in the center of her forehead healed completely. Her fanged smile became even more unsettling. Joey immediately opened fire, covering their escape. The group fled the bedroom, their faces pale with terror. 5 of them had barely survived, and they could only hope that the locked door would hold. Peter, still shaken, muttered how lucky he was. At least the cannibal wasn't here. Frank nearly lost his temper. He shouted in frustration, pointing out the obvious. Abigail was the cannibal. Her razor-sharp fangs had made it clear. Fangs, bullet wounds that healed instantly, and the ability to disguise herself as a normal human made it clear that this wasn't just any monster. She was a vampire. Sammy, who had seen countless vampire movies from Daniel CC Movie Channel, immediately recalled their weaknesses: crosses, garlic, and sunlight. And of course, the most effective method of all, driving a wooden stake through their heart. Now that they understood what they were dealing with, Frank took charge. He ordered everyone to search for wooden stakes and garlic. Joey objected. She believed that only the vampire knew how to escape the villa, so instead of killing her, they should capture her alive. Frank ignored her smelly bullshit completely and stormed into the bedroom with 2 others. But the vampire was already gone. Then, from a distance, a haunting melody filled the air. It's the sound of a ballet performance. Following the music, the 3 of them arrived at a grand hall where they found the vampire dressed in an elegant ballet outfit, dancing in TikTok style with the flat-top man's decapitated body. She twirled and spun, utterly immersed in her performance. Seizing the opportunity, Sammy boldly charged forward with the wooden stake and garlic. The vampire swatted the stake away effortlessly and even snatched the garlic, taking a deep breath as if savoring its scent. Then, with a playful smirk, she threw a tiny punch at Sammy's chest, almost shattering her implants. Peter's cross was no use either. The vampire yanked it off and used it as a weapon, stabbing his muscular chest until it was drenched in diabetic blood. Frank suffered the worst fate. The vampire impaled his leg with the wooden stake, leaving him severely injured. The 3 barely managed to escape, while the vampire simply stood there, smiling as she watched them flee for their shitty lives. After patching up Frank's wound, Joey brought up her plan again. She reminded them of the moment they had kidnapped Abigail. She had been injected with a sedative and was unconscious the entire time. She hadn't been faking her coma. Her weak pulse had been real. That meant that the only thing capable of stopping her now was this very sedative. They immediately sprang into action. Equipped with the butler's walkie-talkies, the 4 split up to search for the vampire. Once someone spotted her, they would signal the others to regroup. While searching, Sammy was startled by a swarm of fat bats and accidentally fell into the villa's swimming pool. When she opened her eyes underwater, she saw rotting limbs and severed body parts floating all around her. The stench of decay filled her lungs. She screamed hysterically in a chicken voice, completely losing her composure. Meanwhile, the vampire had set her sights on Peter, who had been slacking off. The moment he saw her, he ran for his life, twisting and turning through the hallways in an effort to escape. He finally slammed a wooden door shut behind him, thinking he was safe, until the vampire broke right through it. With no other choice, Peter kept running. Just as the vampire closed in on him, Frank suddenly flung open a door, knocking Peter backward and sending him flying over the railing like a Barbie toy. He crashed onto the floor below with a heavy thud. Now the vampire changed targets. She leapt into the air and lunged at Frank, not wanting to have a baby with him but shoving him down a staircase, making his already severe leg injury even worse. Sammy tried to help, but the vampire bit down on her arm. Peter, using his sheer strength, tackled the vampire to the ground and pinned her beneath his massive frame. That was when Joey plunged the syringe into her neck. The vampire screamed in rage, cursing them as the sedative took effect. Moments later, she collapsed into unconsciousness. When the vampire woke up, she was locked inside an iron cage. Sammy, still panicking about her bite wound, frantically asked if she would turn into a vampire. The vampire simply tilted her head playfully and said, "Maybe." Joey then proposed a deal. If the vampire told them how to escape the villa, they would set her sexy body free. But the vampire refused without hesitation. With a chilling smile, she revealed that this kidnapping had been actually orchestrated by her. She had designed this entire game. She had handpicked every single one of them. They all thought they were strangers, but in reality, they had one thing in common. Each of them had wronged her father. Some had caused his business to suffer losses. Some had attempted to expose his crimes. And as his devoted daughter, she had no intention of letting them go unpunished. The original plan was to turn everyone into human sashimi, serving them as a feast for her father. But given how things had unfolded, she was willing to make a concession. Whoever unlocked the iron cage first would be allowed to live. The simple-minded Peter immediately reached out to unlock it, hoping to secure the only chance at survival. But Joey quickly shot him in the stomach, then, along with Sammy, helped him into the room to treat his wound, leaving only Frank to guard the cage. The vampire continued to tempt Frank, claiming that the deal to unlock the cage was still valid, but warned that she might change her mind soon. Frank hesitated and demanded the vampire reveal the way out of the villa before they continued the conversation. A flicker of panic crossed the vampire's face, as if she feared he would turn and leave. She quickly revealed that the library contained a hidden door. By finding the red book, they could open a secret passage leading outside. Now it was Frank's turn to unlock the cage. He placed his hand on the lock but hesitated, then suddenly broke into laughter, mocking the vampire for living for centuries and still failing to understand human nature. The vampire smiled in response, and with one swift motion, shattered the iron cage. It turned out the cage had never been able to hold her. Everything that had happened before was just an act. Just as Frank was about to be torn apart, Joey smashed the wooden window open, and a beam of sunlight struck the vampire's arm. The moment it touched her, her arm swelled up and then exploded with a deafening sound. She howled in agony, but her severed arm began to regrow, new flesh and bones slowly forming. The group seized the chance and rushed into the library. Sammy, who had been bitten, tentatively reached her fingers into the sunlight and, to her relief, realized she hadn't transformed. Frank quickly found the red book, but as soon as he grabbed it, he discovered the vampire had lied because there was no secret passage. Despair settled over the group, and they collapsed, defeated in the sunlight. Joey urged them to hold on, reminding them that their only advantage right now was the sunlight. Once night fell, they would be completely vulnerable. Unlike vampires, humans have emotional ties, the reasons to live. For Joey, her reason for surviving was her son, whom she hadn't seen in years. She had once been a military doctor, but during a mission she was severely injured and had to take large doses of morphine. This led to an uncontrollable addiction that drained her life, causing her to lose everything: her wealth, her career, and most painfully, her dignity. She could no longer face her son. It wasn't until she encountered the vampire that she realized that survival is the most important thing. Frank sneered after hearing the story, while Sammy was visibly moved by Joey's words. Suddenly, it occurred to her that all the doors in the room were automated, meaning they were powered electronically. There had to be a control room somewhere, and if they could just find and shut off the main switch, they could escape. The group decided to split into two teams to search for the switch. Joey teamed up with Frank, while Peter went with Sammy. As they entered the dark hallway, Sammy suddenly broke down, terrified that the vampire might jump out from the shadows. Peter squeezed her hand, comforting her using his muscles, and promising that they would be lifelong friends once they escaped. After speaking those words, Peter ventured deeper into the hallway, cheerfully announcing that it was safe. But when he turned around, he saw that Sammy's bite mark had healed, and from her gums, sharp fangs emerged. She had lost consciousness, now feasting greedily on Peter's body. As the ballet music began to play, the vampire glided across the floor in sync with the melody, and Sammy couldn't help but start dancing along, as if she were the vampire's reflection. By the time Joey and Frank arrived, Peter had already been torn apart, his body unrecognizable. Sammy was facing away from them, dramatically performing a sorrowful act, unaware that tiny patches of sunlight were shining on her. As the light hit her, white smoke began to rise from her body, exposing her true nature. Joey shouted for the rest to run, grabbing Frank and pulling him into a small study. Their only cover was the small patch of sunlight on the floor. Sammy followed them, and with a look of resignation, she said in a vampire's voice that she hated this room. It's where her father turned her into this. Seizing the moment while Sammy was distracted, Joey quickly raised a metal tray to reflect the sunlight. The beam of light struck Sammy's greasy body, and in an instant, she exploded like a punctured water balloon. Just as the two of them stood there, stunned, the hidden door automatically opened. They hesitated, suspecting it might be a trap, but with no other choice, they bravely stepped inside. The good news was that there was indeed a secret passage, and at the end of it, they found the control room. The bad news was that the butler was standing right in front of them, and he too was a vampire. The butler extended a hand and grabbed Joey, choking her until she lost consciousness, then disdainfully tossed her to the floor. However, he didn't attack Frank. Instead, he invited him to join the vampire clan. Together, they could kill Abigail and her father, take over the billion-dollar fortune, and become the powerful and wealthy elite. Frank immediately threw the wooden stake aside, and with an eager tilt of his head, he accepted the transformation. The butler sank his fangs into his flesh, then forced some of his diabetic blood into Frank's mouth. The vampire blood surged through his body like a living thing, seeping down his throat into his organs. The transformation was excruciating, but once completed, his wounds healed instantly, and an overwhelming surge of immense power flowed through him. The butler slowly walked toward Joey, preparing to personally teach Frank how to feed, but unexpectedly, Frank attacked from behind, driving a wooden stake through his heart, causing him to explode on the spot. Joey realized Frank was a vile, despicable person and knew that she would also soon fall prey to his fangs. Just then, Abigail appeared, leaping forward to fight Frank. Unfortunately, the difference in strength was too great. Abigail was held in his grip, unable to move, forced to endure as he slowly bit through her neck. In the meantime, Joey took the opportunity to shut off the main power switch and grabbed her phone, trying to escape. But to her despair, the hidden door had been locked by Abigail, and she had no idea when Frank would catch up. Her time was running out. Joey dialed her son's number, but it went unanswered, straight to voicemail. She had so much to say to him, but all she could manage was a simple message saying she was sorry and she loved him. Frank's figure became clearer, still mocking Joey for her futile, misplaced maternal love, calling her nothing more than a failed addict. He wasn't in a hurry to kill her. Instead, he kicked the hidden door open, throwing her into the study to slowly torture her. It was clear that Frank was imitating Abigail, playing with his food. He wanted to tear her apart only after she had been beaten to the point of wishing for death. The twisted Frank decided to bite Joey and turn her into a puppet like Sammy, using her to kill her own son. After making his plans, he threw her heavy body off a high platform, intending to break her bones first. But to his surprise, Abigail caught Joey in her arms. Abigail, weakened by having most of her blood drained, asked Joey to help her kill Frank, promising that once the deed was done, she would let her leave the villa. Frank leisurely walked down the stairs, not taking either of them seriously. Abigail stood in front of Joey, telling Frank that only by draining her blood would he be able to kill her. The two vampires began to fight, and Joey grabbed a metal spike, helping Abigail. Frank grabbed the girl, snapping her bones with ease, then pinned Joey to the wall. Abigail quickly healed her broken bones and, using her agility, put some distance between herself and Frank. She attacked him with all her might, but her fragile body couldn't withstand his strength. As he drained her blood, she extended her pinky finger toward Joey, as if asking if she remembered their promise since she said she wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Joey desperately pulled at the metal spikes in her body, but only managed to remove a small piece before Abigail was completely drained. As Abigail lay dying, Frank realized he had been tricked because only a stake through the heart could kill a vampire. But he didn't act immediately. Instead, he dragged Joey off the spikes and bit into her neck, intending to turn her into his puppet and force her to kill Abigail with the wooden stake. As Frank whispered to her, Joey, dazed, slowly walked toward Abigail. Suddenly, she spun around and attacked Frank. It turned out that only vampires who had lived for centuries had the power to control puppets. People like Frank, with only brute strength, could never match that. Abigail rushed to help Joey, and together, the two women, fragile as they were, summoned a burst of strength. They drove the wooden stake into Frank's heart, causing his rotten flesh to explode, and the two of them were drenched in his blood. Abigail looked at Joey and sincerely thanked her, fulfilling her promise to let her leave the villa. Before leaving, Abigail expressed her wish to return to her son. She was also once a child, and she knew that what a child needs most is simply the presence of their parents. Joey smiled and nodded. She had reached the front door, just one step away from freedom. But at that moment, Abigail's father appeared, blocking her way, seemingly not intending to leave any survivors. As he bared his unbrushed fangs, Abigail once again stepped in front of Joey, tearfully telling her father that Joey was her savior. The father looked into his daughter's defiant, tear-filled eyes, and a wave of guilt washed over him. He gently took Joey's hand and tongue massaged it with respect. The villa doors opened, and a blood-soaked woman limped out, climbing into the same car she had arrived in heading back home. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.